The gunshot echoed through the empty parking garage before Elena Rossi even understood what she was seeing. She had only come outside to get fresh air after a long shift at the hospital, her sneakers tapping against the concrete as she searched for her car. Then she heard voices, sharp and cold, coming from behind a row of parked cars. She should have turned around. She should have walked away and pretended she heard nothing. Instead, her feet froze, and her eyes landed on a man standing over another man who was kneeling on the ground, trembling. The man standing tall wore a dark coat that fit him like armor. His face was calm, almost bored, as if this moment meant nothing to him. But his eyes, when they lifted and found hers across the garage, were anything but calm. They were sharp, assessing, dangerous. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She had walked into something she was never supposed to see. For a long moment, nobody moved. The kneeling man whimpered something Elena couldn't understand. The man in the coat didn't even glance at him. His attention stayed locked on her, studying her the way a predator studies something unfamiliar in its territory. Elena's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't listen. She stood there, frozen, gripping her hospital badge so tightly the edge cut into her palm. "Leave," the man finally said. His voice was low, controlled, carrying an authority that made the single word feel like a command carved in stone. Now. Elena didn't need to be told twice. She turned and walked as fast as she could without breaking into a run, her mind racing with 1,000 questions she didn't want answered. She reached her car, fumbled with her keys, and drove away with her hands shaking on the wheel. She told herself it was over. She told herself she would never see that man again. She was wrong. 3 days later, a black car was parked outside her apartment building when she came home from her shift. She noticed it because it looked too clean, too polished for her modest neighborhood. She thought nothing of it until she saw him leaning against it, arms crossed, watching her with the same unreadable expression from the garage. Elena stopped walking. Her pulse spiked, but this time, along with fear, something else stirred inside her, anger. "Are you following me?" she asked, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. The man studied her for a moment before answering. "I wanted to see if you were smart enough to keep quiet. And if I wasn't? Then we wouldn't be having this conversation." Elena crossed her arms, refusing to let him see how much her hands were trembling. "So what happens now? You threaten me? Tell me to disappear?" Something flickered across his face, something close to amusement. "If I wanted you to disappear, you already would have." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they made her angrier. "Then what do you want?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. Most people who saw what she saw begged, cried, or ran without looking back. She had done none of those things. She had looked him in the eye and demanded answers. "Dante," he finally said. "My name is Dante. I didn't ask for your name." "No," he agreed, a corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "But you're going to need it." Before she could respond, he turned and got into his car. The engine roared to life, and within seconds, he was gone, leaving Elena standing on the sidewalk with her heart pounding and her mind spinning. She told herself she wouldn't think about him again. She told herself the fear would fade, and life would go back to normal. But that night, lying awake in her bed, she couldn't stop replaying the way his eyes had studied her, like he was trying to memorize something rare. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse office overlooking the skyline, Dante Marchetti sat in silence, staring out the window, unable to stop thinking about the woman who had looked him in the eye and hadn't flinched. He told his men it was about loose ends. He told himself the same thing. But deep down he knew it was something else entirely, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. For a man who controlled everything around him, the fact that one nurse with tired eyes and a sharp tongue could unsettle him so completely was more dangerous than any rival he had ever faced. And Dante Marchetti did not like feeling unsettled. He liked it even less when, days later, he found himself driving toward the hospital where she worked, instead of handling the business waiting for him at home. He told himself it was simply to make sure she hadn't talked. He told himself it was strategy, nothing more. But when he saw her walking out of the building in her scrubs, laughing at something a colleague said, something shifted in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Elena noticed him standing near the entrance before her colleague did. Her laughter faded, replaced by a wary stillness. She said a quick goodbye and walked toward him, refusing to let him see how much his presence rattled her. "You need to stop showing up wherever I am," she said, keeping her voice low so no one else would hear. "I have business near here," Dante replied smoothly, though the excuse sounded weak even to his own ears. "Right," Elena said, folding her arms. "And that business just happens to bring you outside my job 3 times this week?" His silence was answer enough. Elena studied him for a long moment. He wasn't what she expected. She had imagined him as pure menace, an image built on fear and cruelty. Instead, standing there in the afternoon light, he looked almost human, tired around the eyes, controlled but restless, like a man carrying more weight than he let anyone see. "I'm not scared of you," she said finally, though her heartbeat betrayed her. "I know," Dante said quietly. "That's the problem." For the first time since that night in the garage, Elena saw something in his expression that wasn't calculated or cold. It looked almost like vulnerability, quickly hidden behind his usual composure. "You should be scared," he added. "Most people are." "I'm not most people." "No," he said, his voice softer now. "You're not." Neither of them moved for a long moment, the tension between them shifting into something neither wanted to name. Elena felt it too, the pull she couldn't explain, the way her anger kept tangling with curiosity she didn't want to admit. "I have to go," she finally said, breaking the silence. Dante nodded once, stepping back to let her pass, but as she walked away, he called out one more thing. "Elena." She stopped, surprised he knew her name, though she shouldn't have been. Of course he knew. He probably knew everything about her. "This isn't over," he said simply. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Both of them already knew it was true. As she drove home that evening, Elena tried to convince herself that the fluttering in her chest was fear, nothing more. But some quiet, honest part of her knew it was something far more complicated, something she wasn't ready to face. She called her closest friend, Grace, the moment she got inside, needing to hear a normal voice after such a strange week. "You're being followed by a stranger and you didn't call the police?" Grace asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "It's complicated," Elena said, sinking onto her couch. "It sounds dangerous. Not complicated." Elena didn't have an answer for that. She knew Grace was right. She knew that walking away and reporting everything would be the smart thing to do. But something about the encounter kept replaying in her mind, and it wasn't only fear driving those thoughts. "Just be careful," Grace said quietly before hanging up. Elena set her phone down and stared at the ceiling, wondering what exactly she had stumbled into and why. Despite every warning bell in her mind, she couldn't stop thinking about the man with the unreadable eyes. Meanwhile, across the city, Dante sat in his office long after his men had gone home. His second-in-command, Nico, knocked once before entering, carrying a folder of numbers that no longer seemed to hold Dante's attention. "You've been distracted," Nico said carefully, setting the folder down, "ever since the incident in the garage." "I'm fine," Dante replied, though his voice lacked its usual sharpness. Nico studied him for a moment, choosing his next words with caution. "The nurse, Elena Rossi. You've had her watched for days. That's not standard protocol for someone who saw nothing important." "She saw enough. She hasn't said a word to anyone," Nico pointed out. "Most people talk. She hasn't." Dante's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't respond, because he didn't have an answer that made sense, not even to himself. "Be careful," Nico added quietly. "Whatever this is." Dante didn't reply. He simply returned his attention to the window, watching the city lights below, his mind far away from numbers and business, caught instead on the memory of a woman who had looked him in the eye without a trace of fear. Meanwhile, Dante returned to his world of power and control, a world where weakness was never allowed, where distractions could cost lives. Yet as he sat behind his desk that night, staring at nothing, he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about enemies or business. He was thinking about a woman who refused to be afraid of him, and he had no idea what to do with the way that made him feel. Somewhere deep inside, a war had already begun, one that had nothing to do with rival families or old grudges. It was a war between the man Dante had built himself to be, and the man he was slowly becoming, whenever Elena Rossi was near. And neither of them yet understood how far that war would carry them. 2 weeks passed, and Elena convinced herself the strange chapter of her life was finally closing. No black car waited outside her apartment. No tall figure lingered near the hospital entrance. She told herself she should feel relieved, and yet, somewhere beneath that relief, there was a strange hollow feeling she refused to name. She threw herself into work instead, picking up extra shifts, filling every quiet moment so her mind had no room to wander toward memories of dark eyes, and a voice that had sounded like a warning and a promise at the same time. It was on a rainy Thursday evening, as she left the hospital exhausted after a double shift, that she saw him again. He wasn't leaning against a car this time. He was standing beneath the small overhang near the entrance, sheltered from the rain, holding 2 cups of coffee, like he had been waiting for exactly this moment. Elena stopped walking, water dripping from her jacket, staring at him with equal parts frustration and disbelief. "You can't keep doing this," she said, though her voice lacked the sharp edge it once had. "I brought coffee," Dante said simply, holding 1 cup toward her. Not a threat, just coffee. Elena eyed the cup suspiciously before finally taking it, if only because the warmth against her cold hands felt too good to refuse. "This doesn't mean anything," she muttered. "I didn't say it did." They stood beneath the overhang together, rain falling steadily beyond the small shelter, an odd silence settling between them that wasn't entirely uncomfortable. "Why are you really here, Dante?" she finally asked, tired of pretending she didn't want to know. He considered the question longer than she expected. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's the truth. I don't do this. I don't chase people. I don't explain myself." "Then why start now?" His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable, yet something in them had softened since the night in the garage. "Because I can't stop thinking about you, and it's starting to become a problem." Elena's breath caught, though she tried to hide it behind a sip of coffee. "That sounds like your problem, not mine." A faint, almost reluctant smile crossed his face. "Maybe." For the first time since this strange collision of their lives began, Elena allowed herself to really look at him, not as the dangerous man from that night, but as someone standing in the rain holding coffee, looking oddly out of place outside the world he usually controlled. "I have questions," she said quietly. "A lot of them." "I know. Will you actually answer them, or just disappear into another black car again?" Something flickered behind his eyes, a rare kind of honesty most people never saw from him. "Ask me one. I'll answer it." Elena studied him carefully before deciding. That night in the garage, what happens to people who see things they shouldn't? Dante's expression grew serious, the playful edge disappearing entirely. "Depends on the person. Most disappear from the situation entirely, convinced to forget what they saw. And if they can't forget, then it becomes complicated," he said simply. "Like you." Elena swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over her. She wasn't foolish enough to believe his world was safe or simple. But standing there, watching the way his guarded expression occasionally cracked when he looked at her, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel around a man like him, curiosity stronger than fear. "I should go," she finally said, though she didn't move right away. "I know," Dante replied, but neither of them moved for another long moment. Eventually, Elena walked toward her car, glancing back once to see him still standing beneath the overhang, watching her leave with an expression she couldn't quite read. She told herself this would be the last time. She told herself the same thing every time, and every time, she found herself wrong. Over the following weeks, their encounters became less accidental and more intentional, though neither of them said it out loud. Dante would appear near the hospital, with a reason that grew flimsier each time. Elena stopped pretending to be annoyed, though she still guarded her words carefully, unwilling to let herself fall too easily into whatever this strange connection was becoming. One evening, Dante invited her to a quiet restaurant tucked away from the busier parts of the city, a place with dim lighting and private booths where no one paid attention to who came and went. Elena hesitated before agreeing, telling herself it was simply curiosity, nothing more. The dinner started stiff, both of them cautious, unsure how to navigate a conversation that wasn't tangled in danger or suspicion. But slowly, the walls between them began to lower. "Tell me something real," Elena said, swirling the wine in her glass. Not about your business. About you. Dante considered her request carefully. I grew up watching my father build something out of fear, he finally said. I promised myself I would build something out of control instead. Control feels safer than fear. Does it? Elena asked softly. Feel safe? He met her eyes, something raw flickering behind his usual composure. Not anymore. The admission hung between them, honest and unguarded in a way neither expected. Elena felt her resistance weakening, the careful walls she had built around herself slowly beginning to crack. And you? Dante asked, turning the question back toward her. Tell me something real. Elena hesitated before answering. I became a nurse because I wanted to fix things, save people. Maybe that's naive in a world like yours. It's not naive, Dante said quietly. It's rare. They talked for hours that night, the conversation drifting from careful honesty to easy laughter, a version of both of them neither expected to exist outside the tension that first brought them together. For the first time, Elena saw glimpses of the man beneath the reputation, someone who carried more weight than his calm exterior ever revealed. But even as the evening softened into something warm and unexpected, danger moved quietly in the background of both their lives, unseen but steadily approaching. Across town, in a dimly lit office belonging to a rival family, a man named Victor Callahan sat listening to a report from one of his associates. Victor had spent years watching Dante Marchetti's empire grow, waiting patiently for any sign of weakness he could exploit. He's been distracted, the associate reported, missing meetings, delegating decisions he used to handle personally, all because of a woman. Victor's eyes narrowed with interest. A woman? A nurse. Elena Rossi. He's been seen with her multiple times over the past month. A slow, calculating smile spread across Victor's face. In his world, weakness was opportunity, and nothing weakened a man faster than something he couldn't afford to lose. Find out everything about her, Victor instructed. Everything. Meanwhile, unaware of the storm quietly gathering around them, Dante walked Elena to her car after their dinner, the night air cool against the warmth still lingering between them. I had a good time, Elena admitted, surprising herself with how easily the words came. So did I, Dante said, standing closer than strictly necessary. For a moment, neither of them moved, the space between them charged with something neither wanted to name yet. Elena's heartbeat quickened, torn between the instinct to step back and the stronger, more confusing urge to close the distance instead. Good night, Dante, she finally said, breaking the tension before it could carry them somewhere neither was ready for. Good night, Elena. She drove home that night with a small, unfamiliar smile tugging at her lips, unaware that somewhere across the city, a dangerous man was already gathering information about her life, preparing to use whatever he found as a weapon against the man who had let his guard down for the first time in years. Dante, meanwhile, returned to his penthouse with a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. For a man who built his entire life around control and calculation, the feeling was both unfamiliar and unwelcome, yet he found himself unwilling to push it away. Nico noticed the change immediately when Dante arrived the next morning, humming quietly to himself as he reviewed reports that usually earned nothing but a scowl. You're different, Nico observed carefully. I'm fine, Dante replied, though the small smile tugging at his mouth betrayed him. This is about the nurse. Dante didn't bother denying it this time. Yes. Nico's expression grew serious. You know this puts her at risk. Anyone connected to you becomes a target, whether you want that or not. The words settled heavily over Dante, chipping away at the lightness he had felt only moments before. He knew Nico was right. He had always known the danger his world carried, yet somehow, caught in the warmth of Elena's presence, he had allowed himself to forget it, even briefly. I'll handle it, Dante said quietly, though the promise felt heavier than he expected. Handle it before it handles you, Nico warned. Dante nodded, though his mind was already drifting back to the previous night, to the sound of Elena's laughter, and the way her eyes had softened when she spoke about wanting to fix things. He knew the danger surrounding his world better than anyone. He simply hadn't expected how difficult it would be to walk away from something that finally felt real. As the days passed, Elena found herself thinking about Dante more often than she wanted to admit. She told Grace only pieces of the truth, careful not to reveal too much, though her friend's suspicious glances suggested she wasn't entirely convincing. "You like him," Grace said one evening, studying Elena over cups of tea. "Don't try to deny it." "It's complicated," Elena said again, the same excuse she always used. "It's always complicated with dangerous men," Grace replied. "Just be careful. Whatever this is, make sure you're the one in control of it, not him." Elena wanted to believe that was still true, but deep down, she wasn't entirely sure control belonged to either of them anymore. Whatever this connection was, it had already begun pulling them both somewhere neither could fully predict, somewhere far more dangerous than either of them realized. And far away, in Victor Callahan's office, a folder filled with details about Elena Rossi's life sat waiting on his desk, patient and ready. A quiet threat neither Dante nor Elena yet understood was already circling closer. A week later, Elena found herself standing outside Dante's penthouse building for the first time, invited not for dinner, but for something quieter, something he described only as wanting her to see a piece of his world that had nothing to do with business. She hesitated at the entrance, torn between curiosity and caution, before finally stepping inside. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than it should have, her nerves tightening with every passing second. When the doors opened, Dante was waiting, dressed more casually than she had ever seen him. His usual sharp suit replaced with a simple dark sweater that made him look younger, less burdened by the weight he carried everywhere else. "You came," he said, sounding almost surprised. "I told myself I wouldn't," Elena admitted, stepping past him into the apartment. "Clearly I don't listen to myself very well." The penthouse was exactly what she expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Clean lines, expensive furniture, a view of the city that stretched endlessly beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Yet scattered among the polished perfection were small, unexpected details. A worn photograph on a shelf, a stack of books that looked well-read rather than decorative. "This is a photograph of my mother," Dante said, noticing where her attention had drifted. "She passed when I was young, before all of this." He gestured vaguely around the apartment, though Elena understood he meant more than the physical space. "I'm sorry," Elena said softly. "It was a long time ago," Dante replied, though something in his voice suggested the loss still lingered closer than he let most people see. They spent the evening talking, the conversation drifting easily between lighter topics and deeper truths neither had planned to share. Elena learned about the weight Dante carried since inheriting his position far younger than he should have, forced into control before he was ready, shaped by a world that offered no room for softness. Dante, in turn, learned about Elena's early years spent caring for a sick parent, about the exhaustion and determination that shaped her decision to become a nurse, about her quiet dream of one day opening a small clinic in the neighborhood where she grew up. "You have plans," Dante said, something like admiration coloring his voice. "Real ones, beyond surviving each day, don't you?" Elena asked. Dante considered the question longer than expected. "I used to think surviving was the plan, building something that couldn't be taken from me. I never thought much beyond that." "And now?" His eyes met hers, steady and unusually open. "Now I'm not sure anymore." The air between them shifted, charged with something neither dared name directly. Elena felt the pull toward him growing stronger with every passing moment, the careful distance she had tried to maintain slowly dissolving, despite every warning in her mind telling her to be cautious. "This is dangerous," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "I know," Dante admitted. "I should be terrified of you." "You should," he agreed, stepping closer. "Are you?" Elena searched his eyes, searching for the menace she had first witnessed in that parking garage. She found traces of it still, buried beneath layers of control, but overshadowed now by something far more human, something that made her chest ache with a feeling she wasn't ready to name. "No," she admitted softly, "not anymore." The confession hung between them, fragile and honest. Dante reached out, his fingers brushing gently against her hand, testing the boundary neither of them had crossed yet. Elena didn't pull away. "Elena," he said quietly, her name sounding different in his voice than it ever had before. Before either of them could take the moment further, Dante's phone buzzed sharply against the table, breaking the fragile connection between them. His expression shifted instantly, control sliding back into place as he glanced at the screen. "I have to take this," he said, stepping away. Elena watched him walk toward the window, his shoulders tensing as he answered the call, his voice dropping into the low, commanding tone she recognized from that first night in the garage. Whatever business demanded his attention clearly wasn't ordinary, and watching the shift in him reminded her sharply of exactly who he was and the world he belonged to. When he returned, the warmth from earlier had cooled slightly, replaced by a guarded tension he tried to hide. "Is everything all right?" Elena asked carefully. "Just business," Dante said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Elena didn't push further, though the earlier ease between them had shifted, replaced by a quiet reminder that Dante's world existed just beneath the surface of every soft moment they shared. She left shortly after, the walk to her car feeling heavier than it should have, her mind spinning with everything she had learned, and everything she still didn't understand. Meanwhile, Dante stood at his window long after she left, staring out at the city, his earlier warmth replaced by cold calculation. The call had come from one of his men, warning him that Victor Callahan's associates had been asking questions about Elena Rossi throughout the city. Dante's jaw tightened, his earlier vulnerability hardening instantly into something sharper, more protective. He had allowed himself to grow close to her without fully considering the danger that closeness invited. Now that danger had a name, and it was already circling. He picked up his phone and dialed Nico immediately. "I need eyes on Elena Rossi at all times," Dante said, his voice low and controlled. "Discreet. She's not to know." "You think Callahan is making a move?" Nico asked. "I think he already has," Dante replied grimly. As he ended the call, Dante's mind returned briefly to the softness in Elena's eyes only hours earlier, the way she had admitted she wasn't afraid of him anymore. He wanted desperately to protect that fragile trust, yet he understood better than anyone how quickly his world could destroy the very things he tried to hold on to. For the first time in years, Dante Marchetti felt genuine fear, not for himself, but for someone else entirely. And that fear, more than any threat he had ever faced, terrified him the most. A month passed, and Elena's life had quietly folded itself around Dante's presence, in ways she hadn't fully noticed, until she tried to imagine her days without him. Late-night calls became routine. Quiet dinners became something she looked forward to more than she wanted to admit. Even the wariness she once carried around him had softened into something closer to trust, fragile but growing steadier with each passing week. Yet trust, she would soon learn, was easier to give than to understand fully. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that gave no warning of the storm about to arrive. Elena had stopped by a small bookstore near the hospital, searching for something to read during her rare quiet hours. She was standing near the back shelves when a woman she didn't recognize approached her, her expression polite but pointed. "You're Elena Rossi," the woman said. It wasn't a question. Elena tensed slightly. "Do I know you?" "No," the woman said, offering a thin smile. "But I know Dante Marchetti, and I think you should know exactly who he is before you get any closer." Before Elena could respond, the woman placed a folded newspaper article on the shelf beside her and walked away without another word. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up, her eyes scanning the headline detailing violence linked to organized crime years earlier. Dante's name mentioned among several others connected to a case that had never been fully resolved. Elena had known, of course, in some vague, distant way, exactly what world Dante belonged to. But knowing something abstractly and reading detailed accounts describing the full weight of his world were entirely different experiences. Her stomach twisted uncomfortably as she read further, uncovering pieces of a history far darker and more complicated than the version of Dante she had come to know. She left the bookstore in a daze, her mind spinning with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. That evening, when Dante arrived at her apartment for their usual dinner, Elena's guarded expression told him immediately that something had shifted. "What happened?" he asked carefully, setting down the food he had brought. Elena placed the folded article on the table between them without a word. Dante's expression tightened as he recognized it, understanding immediately what she must have discovered. "Is it true?" Elena asked quietly. "Some of it," Dante admitted, his voice steady despite the tension building between them. "Not all of it is accurate, but I won't pretend the world I live in is clean." "How much of it, Dante?" Elena pressed. "How much blood is actually on your hands?" The question hung heavily in the air, and for a long moment, Dante didn't answer, weighing honesty against the fear of losing her entirely. "Enough that I understand exactly why you should walk away," he finally said. "I built this life to survive a world that offered me no other choice. I've made decisions I'm not proud of. I've hurt people, directly and indirectly. That's the truth, Elena. I won't insult you by hiding it." Elena's eyes filled with a painful mixture of understanding and heartbreak. Some quiet part of her had known this truth from the very beginning, yet hearing it confirmed so plainly made the weight of it undeniable. "I can't be part of that world," she whispered. "I spend my life trying to save people. I can't love someone who—" Her voice broke before she could finish the sentence. "I know," Dante said quietly, though the words cost him more than she realized. The silence between them stretched painfully, neither willing to look away, both understanding that something fragile between them had just cracked under the weight of truth. "I think you should leave," Elena finally said, her voice trembling. Dante didn't argue. He simply nodded, gathering himself with the same controlled composure he wore like armor in every other part of his life, though the pain flickering behind his eyes betrayed just how deeply her words had struck him. "If that's what you need," he said quietly, standing to leave. At the door he paused, glancing back at her one final time. "For what it's worth, everything I felt with you was real. That was never a lie." He left without waiting for a response, and Elena sank onto her couch, tears finally slipping free, as the weight of everything crashed over her at once. Days passed in painful silence. Elena buried herself in work, taking every extra shift available, desperate to keep her mind too exhausted to dwell on the ache lingering in her chest. Grace noticed the change immediately. "You ended things," Grace said one evening, watching Elena carefully. "I had to," Elena replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "Did you want to?" Elena didn't answer, because she wasn't entirely sure herself. Meanwhile, Dante threw himself into work with a similar desperation, though his version of distraction carried far heavier consequences. Nico watched his boss grow increasingly short-tempered, his usual calculated patience replaced by sharp, unpredictable decisions that worried even his closest allies. "This isn't like you," Nico said carefully one evening, watching Dante pace his office. "I'm fine," Dante snapped, though the tension in his shoulders told a different story entirely. "You're not," Nico replied bluntly, "and distraction like this makes you vulnerable. Especially now, with Callahan already circling." Dante's jaw tightened at the reminder. He hadn't forgotten the threat looming over Elena, even after she pushed him away. If anything, her absence made the danger feel even sharper, knowing he no longer had the ability to watch over her as closely as he wanted. "Keep the surveillance on her," Dante instructed, regardless of anything else. Nico nodded, though his expression remained troubled. He understood better than anyone the danger simmering beneath the surface of his boss's controlled exterior. Danger that grew more volatile with every day Dante spent separated from the one person who had somehow managed to soften him. Meanwhile, across the city, Victor Callahan's plans had already begun moving forward. He had learned everything he needed about Elena Rossi's routines, her workplace, her small apartment, the quiet vulnerabilities of a life built without the protection Dante's world usually provided. "She's no longer under his direct watch," one of Victor's associates reported. "Their relationship appears to have ended." Victor's expression twisted into a slow, satisfied smile. "Even better," he said. "A wounded man makes more mistakes than a cautious one." He leaned back in his chair, considering his next move carefully. Using Elena as leverage while she remained close to Dante would have been risky, heavily guarded. But now, separated from Dante's protection and unaware of the danger circling her, she had become an easier, more vulnerable target than ever before. "Prepare everything," Victor instructed. "We move soon." Unaware of the storm gathering around her, Elena continued her days in cautious solitude, trying to rebuild the walls she had let Dante slowly dismantle. She told herself she had made the right decision. She told herself the ache in her chest would fade with enough time. Yet late one evening, walking home from a delayed shift, she noticed a car trailing slowly behind her, far less discreet than the ones she had grown used to seeing outside her apartment. Her heartbeat quickened, old instincts sharpening immediately. She quickened her pace, glancing over her shoulder just long enough to notice two unfamiliar men stepping out of the car, their expressions cold and purposeful in a way that sent a fresh wave of fear crashing through her. Elena broke into a run, her mind racing as she searched desperately for any nearby safety, any way to escape the danger closing in around her. She didn't understand yet who these men were, or why they were suddenly interested in her, but every instinct screamed that this was no coincidence. As she turned a sharp corner, her phone slipped from her pocket, clattering onto the pavement. She barely had time to snatch it back up before continuing her desperate escape, her breath coming in ragged gasps, as she finally spotted the well-lit entrance of a nearby pharmacy and ducked inside, her hands trembling as she watched the men slow their pursuit outside, clearly unwilling to draw attention in such a public space. Shaking, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe, though the fear coursing through her refused to fully settle. She realized then, with sudden painful clarity, that walking away from Dante hadn't made her safe. If anything, it may have made her more vulnerable than ever before. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and, after a long hesitation, dialed the one number she had promised herself she wouldn't call again. Dante answered on the first ring, his voice sharp with immediate concern. "Elena? I need help," she said, her voice shaking. "I think someone's after me." The line went silent for only a heartbeat before Dante's voice returned, hard and urgent. "Stay exactly where you are. I'm coming." For the first time since walking away from him, Elena realized that whatever danger surrounded Dante's world had already found her, whether she remained connected to him or not. And despite every fear that had driven her away, in that terrifying moment, his voice was the only thing that made her feel safe again. Dante arrived within minutes, his car screeching to a stop outside the pharmacy where Elena stood waiting, still shaken but composed enough to walk quickly toward him the moment she saw him step out. He crossed the distance between them in seconds, his hands settling firmly on her shoulders as he studied her face for any sign of harm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with barely controlled worry. "No," Elena said, though her voice still trembled slightly. "Just scared." Dante's jaw tightened as he glanced around the street, his eyes scanning every shadow with practiced precision. "Get in the car," he said quietly. "Now." Elena didn't argue. Whatever pride or hesitation she might have felt under different circumstances had been replaced entirely by the shaken reality of what had just happened. She climbed into the car beside him, and within moments, they were moving through the city streets, Dante's attention split carefully between the road ahead and the rearview mirror behind them. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, his voice calm now, though the tension in his hands against the steering wheel told a different story. Elena recounted everything, her voice steadier with each word as the adrenaline slowly began to fade. Dante listened silently, his expression darkening with every detail, though he said nothing until she finished. "This is Callahan," he said finally, more to himself than to her. "Who is Callahan?" Elena asked. "Someone who has wanted to see me weakened for a long time," Dante said grimly, "and now he's found the perfect way to do it." Elena studied him carefully, understanding settling over her with quiet dread. "He's using me. Against you." Dante didn't answer immediately, though his silence confirmed everything she feared. "I shouldn't have let you push me away," he finally said. "I should have kept you protected, regardless of what you needed from me emotionally. I was careless." "This isn't your fault," Elena said quietly, though part of her wasn't entirely sure she believed that. "It is," Dante replied firmly. "Everyone connected to me becomes a target eventually. I knew that. I let myself forget it because I wanted something normal with you, something outside all of this. That was selfish." Elena reached over hesitantly, placing her hand over his on the steering wheel. "I walked away because I was scared of what loving you would mean. But sitting here now, I understand something I didn't before. Staying away doesn't protect me. It just leaves me alone and unprotected in a world that already knows my name." Dante glanced at her briefly, something fierce and protective flickering behind his eyes. "Then let me protect you properly this time. No more distance, no more pretending separation keeps you safe." Elena nodded slowly, though the fear of what lay ahead still lingered heavily in her chest. Whatever uncertainty had existed between them before tonight had been replaced by something sharper, more urgent, a shared understanding that their fates were already tangled together, whether either of them fully wanted that or not. They arrived at Dante's penthouse shortly after, the familiar space feeling different now, heavier with the weight of everything unfolding around them. Nico was already waiting inside, his expression grim as he greeted them. "We have a problem," Nico said without preamble. Callahan's men were seen near her workplace earlier today as well. This wasn't a single attempt. He's building pressure deliberately. Dante's expression hardened into something colder, more calculating than Elena had seen from him before. "Then we stop being reactive," he said. "Find out everything about his current operations, every weakness, every opening." "And Elena?" Nico asked, glancing toward her. "She stays here," Dante said firmly, "under full protection until this is resolved." Elena wanted to argue, some instinct rebelling against the idea of her life being controlled so entirely by someone else's decisions. Yet looking at the seriousness in both men's expressions, she understood this wasn't about control. It was about survival, hers and possibly Dante's as well. "All right," she said quietly, surprising herself with how easily the agreement came. Over the following days, Elena remained inside Dante's penthouse, the walls that once felt like an unfamiliar world, slowly becoming a strange, temporary refuge. Dante moved constantly between meetings and calls, his focus sharpened entirely around dismantling the threats surrounding them. Yet no matter how consumed he became by strategy, he always returned to check on her, his concerns steady and unwavering, despite the chaos unfolding around them both. "You don't have to keep checking on me," Elena said one evening, watching him step into the room for what felt like the 10th time that day. "I do," Dante said simply, settling beside her. "I need to know you're safe. It's the only thing keeping me steady through all of this." Elena studied him carefully, noticing the exhaustion etched into his expression, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on him, despite his controlled exterior. "This is a lot for you too, isn't it? Not just me being in danger. All of it." Dante exhaled slowly, some of his usual guard slipping away in the quiet privacy of the moment. "I've spent my entire life building walls to survive this world. You're the first person who's ever made me want something beyond survival. Losing that terrifies me more than anything Callahan could ever do." Elena reached for his hand again, holding it gently this time, rather than out of urgency. "You won't lose me," she said softly. "Not without a fight." For a brief moment, the danger surrounding them faded into the background, replaced by something quieter, steadier, a fragile promise neither of them was ready to break. Yet even as they held on to that fragile comfort, the threat circling them continued moving closer, patient and calculating, waiting for the exact moment to strike. And somewhere across the city, Victor Callahan studied his own plans carefully, aware that his first attempt had failed to achieve the fear he intended. Yet failure only sharpened his determination, and his next move would be far more direct, far more dangerous than anything either Dante or Elena had yet prepared for. The attack came on a night neither of them expected, precisely because everything had felt unusually calm for nearly a week. Dante had allowed himself a rare moment of relaxation, sitting beside Elena on the couch as they watched something neither of them was truly paying attention to, comfortable silence settling easily between them. The sudden shattering of glass from the lower floor sent both of them bolting upright, adrenaline instantly flooding through their systems. Dante moved first, pulling Elena behind him instinctively, as Nico burst into the room, his expression tense and urgent. "We have unwanted company," Nico said sharply. "Multiple entry points. This is coordinated." Dante's expression hardened into cold focus. "Get her to the safe room. Now." Elena's heart pounded violently as Dante guided her quickly down a hidden hallway she hadn't noticed before, his hand firm and steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. He pushed open a reinforced door, ushering her inside a small, secure room built for exactly this kind of emergency. "Stay here," Dante said firmly, his eyes locking onto hers with fierce intensity. "No matter what you hear. Do you understand?" "Dante, promise me," he interrupted, his voice breaking slightly beneath its usual control. "I promise," Elena said, though every instinct screamed against staying hidden while chaos erupted beyond the door. Dante pressed a brief, desperate kiss to her forehead before stepping back into the hallway, the heavy door sealing shut behind him, with a sound that echoed far too loudly in the sudden silence surrounding her. Elena sat alone in the small room, her breathing ragged as she listened to muffled sounds of struggle beyond the walls, unable to see anything, unable to help, forced into helpless waiting while the man she loved faced danger on her behalf. Minutes stretched painfully long before the sounds outside finally quieted. Elena strained to listen, uncertain whether the silence meant safety or something far worse. When the door finally opened, Nico stood there, his expression grim but controlled. "It's over," he said. "The immediate threat has been handled, but Dante needs you." Elena's stomach dropped at the urgency in his voice. She rushed past him into the main room, her breath catching sharply at the sight of Dante leaning heavily against the wall, a dark stain spreading slowly across his sleeve, where an injury had clearly occurred during the confrontation. "Dante," she gasped, rushing toward him. "I'm fine," he said, though his pale expression suggested otherwise. "You're not fine," Elena snapped, her nursing instincts immediately overriding her fear as she guided him toward a chair, examining the injury with practiced precision despite her trembling hands. "This needs proper attention." As she worked quickly to stabilize the wound, using supplies Nico retrieved without question, Elena's fear slowly transformed into fierce determination. Whatever danger surrounded their lives, she refused to stand by helplessly, while the people she cared about faced it alone. "You shouldn't have come out there," Elena said quietly as she finished securing the bandage. "I wasn't going to let anything happen to you," Dante replied, his voice steadying now that immediate danger had passed. "Whatever the cost." Elena's eyes filled with a painful mixture of gratitude and fear. "I can't lose you," she admitted quietly. "Not after everything." Dante reached for her hand, holding it gently despite his injury. "You won't," he promised. "But this ends tonight. I won't let Callahan threaten what's mine any longer." Something fierce and protective flickered in his eyes, a warning far more dangerous than anything Elena had witnessed from him before. She understood, watching the calculated determination settle over his expression, that whatever restraint Dante had shown until now had just disappeared entirely. Over the following hours, Dante moved through his penthouse with sharp, decisive purpose, coordinating with Nico and his most trusted allies to dismantle the threat surrounding them permanently. Elena watched quietly from the sidelines, understanding this was a side of Dante she rarely witnessed directly, the calculated, controlled force that had built and protected his entire world. "Are you sure about this?" Elena asked carefully, watching him prepare to leave. Dante paused, turning back toward her with an expression softer than the controlled intensity he had worn moments before. "I have to end this properly, otherwise it never truly ends. You'll never be safe as long as Callahan believes he can use you against me." Elena nodded slowly, though worry still tightened her chest. "Come back safely," she said quietly. "I will," Dante promised, pressing a firm kiss to her lips before stepping away, his expression hardening once more into the calculated resolve of a man about to protect everything he had finally allowed himself to want. The hours that followed felt impossibly long for Elena, waiting anxiously within the safety of Dante's penthouse, while Nico remained behind to guard her, his presence steady but tense as they both awaited news. "Will he be all right?" Elena finally asked, unable to bear the silence any longer. "Dante's always been careful," Nico said, though his tone carried more reassurance than certainty. "He knows what he's doing." Elena wanted desperately to believe that, though the fear gnawing at her chest refused to fully settle until she heard from him directly. Finally, near dawn, Dante returned. Elena rushed toward him the moment he stepped through the door, relief flooding through her as she confirmed he remained unharmed beyond the earlier injury. "Is it over?" she asked breathlessly. "It's handled," Dante said quietly, exhaustion evident beneath his controlled exterior. "Callahan understands now that threatening you carries consequences far beyond what he anticipated. He won't trouble us again." Elena studied him carefully, understanding without needing further explanation exactly what handled meant within the world Dante controlled. Yet strangely, standing there in the quiet aftermath of danger finally resolved, she felt no urge to question it further, no lingering horror at the reality of the world she had chosen to remain connected to. "Thank you," she said softly instead, "for protecting me, for choosing me, even knowing everything this would cost you." Dante pulled her gently into his arms, the exhaustion in his body melting slightly against the relief of holding her safely once more. "You're not a cost, Elena," he murmured against her hair. "You're the only thing in this entire world that's ever felt worth protecting without hesitation." Elena closed her eyes, allowing herself finally to relax fully into his embrace, the weight of fear and uncertainty slowly beginning to lift from her chest. Whatever dangers still existed within Dante's world, she understood now with complete clarity that walking away would never truly protect her. Her fate had already become intertwined with his, not through circumstance alone, but through choice, a choice she finally allowed herself to embrace fully. "I'm staying," she said quietly, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes, "not because I have no other option, because I choose to, because whatever this life brings, I'd rather face it beside you than safely alone." Dante's expression softened into something rare and unguarded, gratitude and love mixing openly across features that rarely allowed such vulnerability. "Then I promise you this," he said quietly. "Everything I build from this moment forward, I build to protect what we have. It's not just my empire, us." For the first time since their paths collided so violently months earlier, Elena felt something settle steadily within her chest. Not naive hope, but a grounded, clear-eyed understanding of exactly what she was choosing and exactly why it mattered. Whatever challenges remained ahead, she no longer faced them as an outsider pulled unwillingly into danger. She faced them as someone who had chosen, deliberately and fully, to stand beside the man who had somehow, against every expectation, become impossible for her to imagine living without. In the days that followed, life inside Dante's world began to settle into something unfamiliar to both of them, a fragile peace neither had experienced since their paths first collided. Elena returned cautiously to her work at the hospital, though now with quiet, careful protection surrounding her every movement, a precaution neither of them questioned any longer. It was during this quieter period that Elena finally met Sofia, Dante's younger sister, a sharp-eyed woman with a warmth that softened the tension Elena hadn't realized she was still carrying. Sofia arrived unannounced one afternoon, studying Elena with open curiosity before breaking into an easy smile. "So you're the one who's finally cracked my brother's armor," Sofia said, settling onto the couch beside her, without waiting for an invitation. "I don't know about cracked," Elena said carefully, still adjusting to the idea that Dante had a sister at all. "Trust me," Sofia said, laughing softly. "I've never seen him like this. Distracted, careful, actually happy." She studied Elena more seriously for a moment. "He spent years building walls around himself. Losing our mother young does that to a person, especially when responsibility gets forced on you before you're ready for it." Elena listened carefully, grateful for the added glimpse into the man she had grown to care for so deeply. "He mentioned that a little," she admitted. "Not much, though." "He wouldn't," Sofia said gently. "He protects people by keeping them at a distance. It's how he's survived this long. The fact that he's let you close enough to see any of it means more than you probably realize." The conversation settled something quietly reassuring within Elena, a confirmation that whatever fear or uncertainty still lingered about the world she had chosen, the connection between her and Dante carried a weight far beyond simple circumstance. Later that evening, when Dante returned from another long day handling the aftermath of recent events, he found Elena and Sofia laughing together over tea. An easy warmth settled between them that visibly caught him off guard. "This is unexpected," he said, watching the scene with something like quiet wonder. "Your sister is wonderful," Elena said, smiling. "She told me embarrassing stories about you as a teenager." Dante groaned quietly, though the small, genuine smile tugging at his mouth revealed he wasn't truly upset. Watching the two most important women in his life interact so easily filled him with a warmth he hadn't expected to feel again, a quiet reminder of the family and normalcy his responsibilities had often forced him to sacrifice. After Sofia left for the evening, Dante settled beside Elena, exhaustion from the day melting slightly in the comfort of her presence. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being kind to her. Sofia's had to sacrifice a lot because of who our family is. She doesn't get many chances to just be herself around people outside our world. She's easy to be kind to," Elena said honestly. "I like her." Dante studied Elena carefully, something thoughtful settling behind his eyes. "You're good for this family," he said quietly. "For me. I don't think I realized how much I needed someone like you until you were already here. Elena leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, as the quiet warmth of the evening settled comfortably around them. I didn't expect any of this either, she admitted, but I'm glad it happened, even with everything that came with it. They sat together in comfortable silence, the earlier danger and uncertainty slowly beginning to feel like distant memories, rather than looming threats. Yet even as peace settled more firmly into their lives, both of them understood that Dante's world would never fully allow complete safety, that vigilance and careful awareness would remain necessary companions to whatever future they built together. Still, for the first time since this entire journey began, neither of them felt burdened by that reality. Instead, they felt steadied by it, grounded in the understanding that whatever challenges remained ahead, they would face them together, deliberately and without hesitation. As the night deepened around them, Dante glanced toward Elena, a quiet resolve settling firmly across his features. "There's something I want to ask you," he said carefully. "Not tonight. Not yet. But soon." Elena studied him curiously, a small smile tugging at her lips despite the seriousness in his tone. "Is that your way of telling me to prepare myself?" "Maybe," Dante admitted, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his usual composure. Whatever came next, Elena understood clearly that the uncertain, dangerous beginning of their story had finally settled into something steadier, something built not on fear or coincidence, but on a choice both of them had made deliberately, fully, and without regret. 3 months passed since the night Callahan's threat had finally been resolved, and life within Dante's world had settled into something Elena once believed impossible, a steady, careful rhythm that allowed room for both danger's lingering presence and genuine happiness to exist side by side. Elena had returned fully to her work at the hospital, though now she carried herself differently, no longer the cautious outsider who had once stumbled unwillingly into a world she didn't understand. She had grown familiar with the quiet protection surrounding her, familiar with Nico's occasional presence nearby, familiar with the careful balance Dante maintained between his responsibilities and the life he was slowly building beside her. Yet despite the peace settling steadily around them, Elena knew Dante still carried unfinished business, promises made in the heat of protecting her that required deliberate, careful follow-through beyond simply neutralizing an immediate threat. "I need to show you something," Dante said one evening, arriving home earlier than usual, his expression carrying a seriousness Elena hadn't seen in weeks. She followed him curiously into his private study, where a thick folder sat waiting on his desk. He opened it carefully, revealing detailed documents outlining significant changes to his business operations, restructured agreements that shifted much of his empire toward legitimate, verifiable enterprises. "What is this?" Elena asked, studying the papers carefully. "A beginning," Dante said quietly. "I've spent years telling myself this life was the only option available to me, but watching how close I came to losing you made me realize I've been building something dangerous simply because I never allowed myself to imagine anything different." Elena looked up at him, surprise and cautious hope flickering across her expression. "You're changing things? Truly?" "Slowly," Dante admitted. "Carefully. Some parts of this world don't disappear overnight, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I want to build something safer, something that doesn't put the people I love directly in danger, simply by existing near me." Elena's chest tightened with emotion, understanding fully the weight of what he was offering, not just to her, but to himself, a chance to redefine an identity built entirely around survival and control, into something steadier, something rooted in more than fear. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, reaching for his hand. Dante studied her carefully, something vulnerable and open settling behind his usual composed exterior. "There's something else," he said quietly. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that made Elena's breath catch instantly. Kneeling gently before her, Dante opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring that caught the evening light softly. "Elena Rossi," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability clearly etched across his features. "From the very first night our paths collided, you've refused to let fear control you. You've challenged me, softened me, and somehow made me want a life I never believed I deserved. I don't offer you safety without complication. I never could, but I offer you everything I am, flaws and all, and everything I'm working to become. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she listened, every fear and uncertainty from their complicated beginning melting away entirely beneath the sincerity of his words. "Will you marry me?" Dante asked quietly. "Yes," Elena said immediately, her voice breaking with emotion as she pulled him up toward her, wrapping her arms tightly around him. "Yes, absolutely yes." Dante held her close, relief and joy replacing the vulnerability he had carried only moments before. Whatever uncertain, dangerous beginning had first brought them together, it had led them here, to a moment neither had expected, but both had come to want more than anything else in their lives. News of their engagement spread quickly among those closest to them. Sophia arrived the following day, practically bursting with excitement as she embraced Elena tightly. "I knew it," Sophia said, laughing through happy tears. "The moment I saw you two together, I knew." Even Nico, usually reserved and cautious, offered a rare, genuine smile when Dante shared the news. "About time," he said simply, though the warmth behind his words carried far more meaning than the brief comment suggested. As the following weeks unfolded, Elena found herself settling more fully into the life she had chosen, no longer haunted by fear of the unknown, but steadied by the deliberate choices both she and Dante continued making together. Dante's efforts toward restructuring his business continued carefully, each step deliberate and cautious, though undeniably steady in its progress toward something safer, more sustainable for the future they were building. One quiet evening, standing together on the balcony overlooking the city that had witnessed the beginning of their complicated, dangerous, and ultimately transformative journey, Elena turned toward Dante with a soft, reflective smile. "Do you ever think about that night in the garage?" she asked quietly. How different everything could have gone. Dante considered the question seriously before answering. "Every day," he admitted. "If you had reacted differently, if I had made a different choice that night, none of this would exist. I've spent years believing chance and coincidence meant nothing beyond immediate practicality. You taught me otherwise." Elena leaned into him, watching the city lights stretch endlessly before them. "I was terrified that night," she admitted. "I never imagined it would lead here." "Neither did I," Dante said softly, wrapping his arms securely around her, "but I'm grateful every single day that it did." They stood together in comfortable silence, the weight of everything they had faced together settling into quiet, steady peace. The dangers that once threatened to tear them apart had instead forged something unbreakable between them, a bond built not on naive innocence, but on hard-earned trust, honesty, and deliberate choice. Elena understood clearly now, standing beside the man who once terrified her into silence and now filled her life with steady, unwavering devotion, that love built through genuine challenge carried a strength unmatched by anything built on easy circumstance alone. Whatever future awaited them, uncertain and undoubtedly still complicated by the remnants of the world Dante was working carefully to transform, Elena faced it without hesitation, without regret, and without the fear that once defined her earliest encounters with him. No matter what had happened between them, no matter the danger, uncertainty, and difficult truths they had both been forced to confront, one thing remained undeniably clear. Dante Marchetti had never truly been able to get her out of his mind, and now, standing together as partners fully committed to whatever future awaited them, neither of them ever wanted him to. Their story, born from fear and danger, had transformed steadily into something neither expected, but both now cherished completely, proof that even the most unlikely beginnings could grow into something worth every risk taken along the way. The wedding took place on a quiet, sunlit afternoon months later, far removed from the shadows and danger that had once defined their earliest days together. Elena stood at the entrance of a small garden venue, her hands trembling slightly, though this time the trembling carried none of the fear that once accompanied every encounter with the man waiting for her. Grace stood beside her, adjusting the delicate fabric of Elena's dress with careful hands, tears already gathering in her eyes. "I still can't believe this is how your story turned out," Grace said softly, laughing through her emotion. "A mafia boss of all people." "Neither can I," Elena admitted, smiling. "But I wouldn't change a single moment of it. Even the terrifying parts?" Grace teased gently. "Especially those," Elena said. "They're the reason I know exactly what I'm choosing, and exactly why it matters." When the music finally began, Elena walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes finding Dante immediately among the small gathering of trusted friends and family. He stood tall and composed as always, yet the raw emotion visible in his expression as he watched her approach revealed a vulnerability few outside their closest circle had ever witnessed from him. Sophia sat in the front row, tears streaming freely down her face, while Nico stood quietly beside Dante, his expression carrying quiet pride beneath his usual composed demeanor. As Elena reached him, Dante reached for her hands, holding them gently as their eyes met, years of complicated history settling into quiet, steady certainty. "You came," he murmured softly, echoing words spoken so long ago beneath a rain-soaked overhang outside the hospital, where their story truly began. "I told myself I wouldn't fall for you," Elena whispered back, smiling through gathering tears. "Clearly I don't listen to myself very well." Dante's answering smile carried none of the guarded control that once defined him, replaced entirely by open, unguarded joy. The ceremony continued quietly, filled with promises neither of them had ever expected to make, built not on naive hope, but on hard-earned understanding of exactly what loving each other required, and exactly why it remained worth every risk they had faced together. As they exchanged their final vows, Elena felt the weight of every difficult moment they had endured settle finally into peaceful resolution. The fear from that first terrifying night in the garage, the uncertainty of falling for a man whose world threatened everything she believed in, the danger that had once placed her life directly at risk, all of it had led steadily toward this singular, quiet moment of complete, unwavering commitment. When Dante finally kissed her, sealing their vows before their small gathering of loved ones, the applause and joyful celebration surrounding them felt like the natural conclusion to a story neither had expected, but both now embraced fully. Later that evening, as the celebration continued quietly around them, Dante pulled Elena aside for a private moment beneath the string lights strung carefully throughout the garden venue. "Regrets?" he asked softly, only half joking. "Not a single one," Elena said honestly, resting her head against his chest as his arms wrapped securely around her. "You?" "Only that I didn't let myself imagine this sooner," Dante admitted quietly. "I spent so long believing control was the only thing that could keep me safe. You taught me that some risks are worth taking, even when they terrify you completely." Elena smiled softly against him, watching the quiet celebration unfolding around them, filled with people who had once been strangers to her, but now felt like family built through shared danger and hard-earned trust. "No matter what happens next," she said quietly, "whatever challenges still remain ahead of us, I'm glad I chose this, chose you." Dante pressed a gentle kiss against her forehead, his voice steady and certain as he replied, "And no matter what happened to bring us here, I could never have gotten you out of my mind. I'm grateful every single day that I never had to try." Together, they stood quietly beneath the soft evening light, their story no longer defined by fear or danger, but by the deliberate, unwavering choice both of them had made to build something lasting from circumstances that once seemed impossibly complicated. Their beginning had been forged in tension and uncertainty, shaped by a world neither expected to navigate together. Yet through honesty, resilience, and choices made deliberately despite every risk involved, they had built something steady and enduring, proof that even the most unlikely love stories could find their way toward lasting peace. And as the evening deepened into night, surrounded by the quiet warmth of everyone who had supported their journey, Dante Marchetti finally understood completely what it meant to build a life around something greater than survival alone. He had found, against every expectation, a partner who matched his strength with her own, who softened his hardest edges without ever asking him to lose himself entirely, and who chose him, deliberately and completely, despite every danger that choice had once demanded. Their story, born from an unexpected collision in a dimly lit parking garage, had grown steadily into something neither could have predicted, yet both now cherished as the most important chapter of their lives. No matter what challenges the future still held, they faced them now as equals, partners bound together not by circumstance, but by choice, resilience, and a love strong enough to outlast every danger that had once threatened to keep them apart.